Got some milk in the fridge there. Just microwave it, and you can have some warm milk.
I never ever had warm milk, and it doesn't sound appealing to me actually. But
It's
The only warm milk I've ever had was in oatmeal.
yeah, it's when it's not supposed to be warm. That's when
Yeah.
I've had it.
Okay, I'm ready to get started. Welcome to the Friend of Sinners. Today we're ready to hit the conversation or topic. Can Christians listen to secular music? Today I'm your host Andrew. I got my friend Josh over here, and I have our good friend Larry Quinn. So yeah, just quickly tell us about yourself, Larry. I don't know, where are you from?
I'm originally from southern Indiana, a little town called New Albany. It's right across the Ohio River from Louisville, Kentucky, which is a little bigger city. Grew up there, stayed there till I graduated high school, went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So life was pretty much spent, my growing life in Indiana, and then my adult life's been all over the place. But yeah, that's where I'm from.
Awesome. So as far as you're over from Indiana, Indiana.
Yes.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wrong side of the globe. Did you grow up as a Christian or?
I found I did the altar call. Of course, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. Answered the altar call about age 12. I'd grown up in church. My great aunt had taken me as a small child. My parents had attended church before I was born and not so much after. But collectively, my family wound up at a church in New Albany, Indiana. Ironically, very similar to how we are at GCBC.
Yeah.
In that the church has outgrown its current walls, and they ended up building a bigger facility.
Yeah.
But anyway, the altar call at 12 went through. Of course, Southern Baptist, you have to go through classes to be baptized. Seems like Southern Baptist, you have to go through classes to do everything.
Really? Is that something they do over there?
Oh yeah, yeah. They
I don't know.
yeah
I've been to Baptist church, but like
it's basically the Romans Road.
Okay.
It's kind of just that path of what salvation is about and where your life fits into that, and so then you're able to be baptized and you do your baptism, and then there's in the 70s Southern Baptist world, once you accepted Christ and once they put you under the water, sin no more. I mean, it was like you weren't supposed to sin.
You couldn't anymore, right?
You weren't going to sin.
Nobody's supposed to sin.
Yeah, you weren't going to sin. It was
wait till they find out about the doctrine of total depravity,
yeah.
or was it original sin?
70 Southern Baptist was tough. I mean, it was a hard line, and Baptists are nationally syndicated, so the service that you heard in our church was very similar to the service that was being heard probably in Louisiana or Florida or any Southern Baptist church, because it followed the convention. Moving towards the point of should you listen to secular music, I've actually been to parties where we burned secular albums.
Oh wow, that's
Why?
Because that was the devil's music.
Okay.
That was Satan's field, and it didn't get played.
Was it specifically because, like, were those specific albums, did they have to do with anything specifically satanic?
Nope.
Or it was just, it's not Christian
It's not
based?
Christian. Everything at that time, all of your daily life, anything that you do is God based. I mean, you're in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. What we now call small groups. They had youth on Saturday night. So you were always in the church, and it was always music that was Christian music. At that time, we were growing up with the Gaithers, a group called
what are the Gaithers?
Bill and Gloria Gaither. The Gaither family.
Okay.
They were really the first touring, one of the first touring families that went to different churches and and very musical. And there were the Gaither singers, and there were 4 or 5 men,
Gotcha.
and Bill was the leader of that. And they come to your church. They had albums. They sold music. There was a group. I believe the name was Regeneration. About that time, they were college kids who had auditioned from all over the country to be in this group that was, I think there was like 8 of them, and they would travel church to church and sing.
So we're asking the question, can Christians listen to secular music? And I wanted to bring you on because you have a pretty interesting past with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just real quick, what do you do? What do you do today? What do you do for a living? What do you...
Today I'm pretty much at the will of the church.
Yeah.
I take care of the existing building. I'm out on the new property. I am the technical director for Grace Community Bible Church.
Okay.
So that pretty much eats into most of my time.
Yeah.
And then trying to always trying to help people that need to move something along or need help making something better. I've been doing audio.
By the way, can I just cut you off for just a second? He has done so much for this podcast. Sorry, I just want to just let the fans know, all 6 viewers, what we have going on here is because of him. He's literally been helping us. So it's just, sorry, just continue on.
No, the gift was given. Everything audio and production, God basically handed to me. At 13 years old, I'm doing audio. My very first thing that I did was right before my 13th birthday, and the minister of music in the church that we were in come to me and said, "You ever run a spotlight?" I said, "Run one? I never seen one." And I remember it was Easter pageant. He showed me the spotlight, how to focus in the light. And the church had a balcony. So when Jesus came with his cross up the aisle, my light was to pick him up and take him all the way to the front and and then expand out and stay with Jesus until he says it is done. And of course, that's always where you end the Good Friday service, because we know Sunday's coming.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. But my very first experience technically with production was that spotlight coming up that aisle, following Jesus to the words "It is done" and turning it off.
Did you mess up?
Nope.
Okay, I'm like, man.
Nope.
That was your first experience with it, and it was started off as a failure. It's
nope.
Oh, no.
No. And then from there, in my middle teens, there was a group called the Abundant Life Singers. There were 2. There was an adult version, and there was a teenage version. I was a part of that 6-member teenage version, and we played in churches in the area, and always took a spring break trip and traveled. We went all the way to Oral Roberts University one year.
What were you doing with them, in the 6?
I was singing with the 6, and I sang in choir in school and sang with I actually sang with the adult choir in church. The problem became that the gift that I had been given was a set of ears that heard things completely different than other people did. So you're standing up there with 6 people and you're singing and you're hearing the sound come back to you from the back wall, and I'm going, well, that's not right.
Yeah.
And that's not right. And it got to be more of a hindrance to me. Number one, in my ability to have worship in what I was doing and to be glorifying God, because I wasn't really singing for the fact of that's what I was there to do. My ears were what was getting in the way. So I started hanging out with the guys who did sound in the church. Well, that would have been in the mid 70s. We didn't have anything that looked like the boards that we have today.
Yeah.
Actually, the first piece of equipment that I mixed on were Bogan power amps were built into it, and you had a tone knob, you had a master volume knob, and you might have 2 mic knobs to be able to set the mic level. But that was it. And every time you needed 2 more mics, you stacked another one on top of it.
Gotcha.
These things were tube amps, forever burning up because they got so hot. Wow. And that's when we realized that I had the technical ability also to put those amps back together. I had been given a package.
So did you just learn this on the fly, or were you taking school, or
No. No, I was following the two guys who did church sound at that time. They both worked for AT&T. They were engineers with AT&T,
Mm-hmm.
and they handled all the stuff in the church. Well, I come along, and what they had to offer knowledge wise, I sucked up in a month.
Wow.
It was just there.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time, technology is progressing along. The church buys its first soundboard, which was an Outtech Lansing board,
Mm-hmm.
6 channels, all self-contained cabinets that went up on tripods. So we would that 6-member group, we could go out with this board, pop it up, do a show. 10 minutes later, take it all down and disappear. So that's where it started. At that same time, music became available on open face reel. You didn't have to carry a piano or an organist or a guitar player. Everything was on tape, pre-mixed. So all you did was
Record and then just stick it in and play
yeah,
it.
it was already recorded.
Uh-huh.
But what if you were doing different groups, that you were doing their music, you would have these tapes. So you would have to take the master tape and then make a smaller tape, and then in the end put all those small tapes together that were going to be the songs that you were going to do. Not something typically that a 13-year-old kid can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just like a little sidetrack, because I find this so interesting. Like, you had no like prior experience, and like you're not doing school, but yet you're like soaking up and learning all these things so
yeah.
quickly and like on the spot. Like, did you feel like this was like a natural gift for you, or like God was maybe just helping you in this particular area, or were you just like, or were you just a prodigy of a kid? You just happened to learn everything, and you know all about cars and all about every like.
It was kind of like that. I mean, I could. I say now my perfect scenario is to mix for a band I've never heard before, in a room I've never worked before, with a sound system I've never used before, because me getting the opportunity to figure all 3 of those things out and put a successful product out in that one night, that's a gift. I mean, because there's a lot of pieces that are happening in that.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, the saying, like, my friend would tell me with sound people is like, no one thanks them until the sound goes off or wrong during a service.
Right.
And like, it's gone so well. Like, you've been serving in our church for so long, and like, there's hardly any times where it just a mic goes wild or anything like that. So like, clearly you might be doing something right. I think
that's the sound gremlins that are trying to ruin everything.
Yeah. As Tony would say, it's Satan was in the
Satan's in the
speaker or
soundboard.
something like
Yeah.
that. On the soundboard.
Yeah, Satan's in the soundboard.
So where did that take you? You're a child prodigy with sound. What did you do with that?
What had happened was, I'm doing it in church. Well, the kids I go to school with are also at church, and they're seeing the things that I'm doing, and they're telling like the choral director and the theater departments, like, Larry Quinn really has this stuff together. So they start asking me to be part of productions, of stage productions and choral recitals and that kind of stuff. So now I'm doing school, and when I had gotten to high school, the high school had an a cappella choir. They had a swing choir, which is basically a group of the a cappellas who take secular music and do some of it a cappella, but then have tape behind them or instruments behind them. So I'm working in the school. I'm working in the church. About halfway through my junior year, they start hitting you with, what are you going to be the rest of your life, or where are you going?
Right.
And my conversation always was, I have this gift and I want to use it. Both church and school are going, that's not really a gift that you use all the time. That's not something that is a lifestyle. That's not something that you build your life around.
And it was because like at that time it wasn't big at all, or just
no, it already had kind of negative connotations.
Gotcha.
To tours, and how even Christian groups had problems with alcohol and fidelity, and all those things were even on the table in the 70s with groups. But at 16 years old, they're saying, your electronics is good. That's good for you to build on, but not the audio.
Yeah.
That's something that you should do as a hobby. Right about that time, I was doing a production with the theater department. One of the guys that was a senior in our high school was playing with a secular band. They were having audio problems. So he comes to me and he says, "Hey, would you come to rehearsal and just see what we're doing and see if we can straighten this out?" I'm like, "Sure." So I meet these guys. I'm at the rehearsal. It takes me about 30 minutes to figure out what's going on, and it's like they've never sounded like that before. So now I'm not quite 16. I'm right at just having quite right at the latter end of 15. So this is a group that basically does one-nighters, but they're very popular. They have an agent. They stay booked all the time. And they said, "Will you be our sound guy?" And so at 15, I'm getting paid to run sound. And I'm going,
awesome.
Okay.
15 years old.
I like this.
Yeah.
This is and then it's, a 15-year-old, and then freedoms come with that. I'm every Friday and Saturday night, I'm somewhere doing a gig, so with the band. And actually at 15, a couple times the band would pick me up from school, and I wouldn't be home till Sunday. We would go somewhere where we had to stay overnight, or we're playing Friday night, Saturday night, and then coming back on Sunday.
What do your parents think of all that?
Well, my mom was absolutely losing it. My dad had grown up fatherless from the age of 9. His dad had died, and in a time in the 30s and 40s when work was tough. I mean, and my dad caddied. My dad was one of those kids that would pick coal up off the railroad track, so they had something to burn in the house. My dad was very independent and very self-sufficient in the way of life, and he loved the fact that he had a son that was that way. But his son was gifted. People were coming to me. The church would call the house, like, "We're having trouble over here. Send Larry."
Yeah.
So both
That's
my
so
parents
wild.
liked that part.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, when it became secular, my dad was still okay with what was going on. He was kind of cautiously walking it in the background. Now, my mom, she was having a problem with it because she was kind of a control freak to begin with, and now she has a 15-year-old kid who's out and gone. So there was a lot of I would say a good 80% of the disagreement between my parents was over me.
Yeah.
Just because that's what the band, when they talked to my parents about me doing and being gone over the weekend, and these weren't a bad group of guys. They all half of them worked for U-Hauls, mechanics during the week, and they were musicians, and the other ones were painters.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a weekend thing for them. They were local guys. They were the one guy that was 2 years ahead of me in school that was with the group. He didn't attend the same church I did, but was very involved in his church. And sometimes on those trips when we were out, he and I would find a church on Sunday and go to church before we even headed back.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So life wasn't too off the rails yet. I mean, everything was. I was getting a lot of pushback from the church. This is going on through 15, age 16. The group that I'm working with is a decent group. They've been asked to open for, at that time, John Cougar Mellencamp was nothing more than a club act. He wasn't playing. He was just on the edge of breaking over into an arena artist. And we actually opened for Mellencamp in a club in Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm getting a taste of the bigger picture of what's coming. Again, I'm going to the church. I'm going to the school. I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm meant to do. And still getting that same feedback. Nobody is addressing it in a positive way. Age 16, I'm quite a few of the local bands. When this one's not playing, I would go do something with a different one or help different ones with audio problems. working out of a music store, working with their sound company, and out of that sound company, I wound up working with Jerry Lee Lewis. I wound up working with Jan and Dean.
Okay.
Earl Scruggs, which is probably way before your guys' time, but if you remember,
Yeah, I'm not familiar with almost any of these.
if you remember Beverly Hillbillies, if you ever heard the intro to Beverly Hillbillies,
really?
Earl Scruggs and his buddy Tubbs are the ones that wrote that music.
Yeah.
Earl Scruggs is kind of the father of the 5-string banjo.
Gotcha.
And just and his band was his family, or most of them were his family. And
that's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, just an amazing man. Jerry Lee Lewis was always considered to be this wild, out of control person on stage. When the lights went off, that was the most gentle thing in the world.
Wow.
Spent many a time just talking life, in the dressing room, and being a young man, and he was, he'd already lived 2 careers. And he would share things, and we would just talk about life. The church is now seeing that I'm working with the sound company, I'm working with the bands. I'm still there to handle Sunday services, or really anything that it got priority.
Mm-hmm.
But because I had stepped into the secular world, it was no longer right for me to be doing stuff at church.
And
so did they not allow you to do it then?
They asked me to step away. They did at 16.
Wow.
Yeah. Not any alternative. It really, if I think at that point, had education-wise or church-wise, had an alternative been offered that was more conducive to where the direction I wanted my life to go, the secular would have probably got pulled back.
Mm-hmm.
But secular didn't get pulled back. I'm working with all of these local artists. I'm working with a sound company. Louisville has one of the largest car shows in the country.
Yeah.
They had a battle of the bands with like 100 bands through a weekend. I'm with the sound company that's doing that. Half of that I'm mixing. Mm-hmm. I'm 16 years old. I mean, I'm a kid.
Yeah. So when you get pushed out from the church, did that affect you spiritually? Did you suddenly start attending church less? And
I basically stopped attending church.
Wow.
I stopped. I walked away.
Was that a sharp next day? You just stopped going to church?
Basically, when the conversation happened, I was back in the church 2 times before I actually left on my first tour. I have a very good friend that I grew up with, and he would call me occasionally when they were having trouble with the youth or some event they had going on. They couldn't get the audio right. He was my best friend. I wasn't going to tell him no. So I would go fix where the problem was. But as soon as it was done, exit stage right, I was out of there.
Yeah.
So my walk took a hit there. I wasn't strong enough in my walk that I understood my relationship was with Christ, not with the church, because everything was centered around the church. Another thing about the Southern Baptist in that time was you didn't question the theology. What came from the pulpit was the word, and that's how you took it. And if you questioned it, it was going to get called down for it. So you really weren't supposed to question things. That was just it. So in a kid's mind growing up in that environment, the church is more of the answer than the relationship with Christ.
I feel like that's a pretty big thing. I just had a great conversation with someone about that. They're just talking about how people in the church they view the church as such a bigger thing than God Himself or Jesus Himself.
In conversations that you have with people today, normally it's I don't have a problem with God. I have a problem with God's people.
Right.
When I have a conversation with a non-believer, I don't mention a church. I don't mention a religion. The first thing I mention is a relationship. It's Christ and you. This is where it starts. You'll wind up in church because you want to be around people who are of that same mindset, who are of that same heart. It's going to lead you there, but it doesn't necessarily start there.
Yeah.
It's a relationship. But in the 70s, that's not really the way it was taught. It was
church first.
It was
God.
church first, and the religion come with that. And I think it was more of a thing where they were trying to corral you into not getting into situations that would create to sin. And by keeping you in that environment all the time, you weren't experiencing the world, and hopefully your sanctification would grow enough in Christ that when you finally did expand out, that the values would carry you. And it was just wrong. I mean, because you weren't experiencing the world as the world was, and then when things happened in your world and you had to deal with them, you weren't looking to run to a savior. You were looking to run to a group of people. You were looking to run to a body. But I stepped away. I mean, they had asked me to, and I did. But at that exact same time, all of a sudden, my secular involvement had exploded. I was mixing every Friday, Saturday night. Now I was getting to be weeknights. I would go to clubs and do stuff. I'm 16 years old. They're having to make special provisions for me to be in nightclubs. And the provision was, when the band's on stage,
or a big trench coat and some bigger shoes, so you're like a couple inches taller.
No, they when I would come through the front door, and then I would be on the list, sound man for whoever, I was immediately escorted to the dressing room, and that's where I stayed. And they would send a bouncer to the dressing room when right before the show would start. He would take me to the board, and when the show was over, he would be right there and take me back to the dressing room.
Yeah, because they got to be strict about it, huh?
Back then, I mean, they would shut you down for underage, for having underage people in a bar, and so the dressing room though was typically where the liquor was stored.
They didn't know you found the liquor cabinet.
We didn't have a liquor cabinet.
People were out paying for drinks in the front. You were just like, here's some free bottles.
Yeah, I mean, it was really crazy. And plus, it's where the band's coming after the fact, or the band that's going on after you is already there. So all the things that you're being exposed to. I mean, I started smoking at age 13, simply because really kids at my age kind of started that. But I was smoking marijuana at 14. Kind of stayed right there. A little bit of caffeine type speed to get you through a tough weekend or whatever. But at that point I'd also started school early. I just beat the deadline of the date. I'm one of the youngest people in my class. I was only 17 when I graduated.
Wow.
So at 16, I had a conversation with a band leader with a band out of Louisville that was at that right on that line of go no, as far as being a big name band. Their leader was at the music store. The music store owner introduced the two of us. We had a conversation. I went to the club, kind of did some auditions with their sound guy. Their sound guy was the guy who had taught me audio that I had worked with the sound company with. He was the one who was doing their shows at that time. And he's like, sure, he's ready to go. I mean, just take him.
Yeah.
And I couldn't go yet. I had skipped so much school by the time I got to my senior year. My final semester, my senior year, I couldn't miss a day.
Yeah.
I had enough credits. It
was just the
done,
attendance was the problem.
But my attendance was horrible.
So let's jump just a little bit forward. Like, what happened 15, 20 years from now? I mean, you started to jump into the secular world. Well, where did that take you?
It wasn't that far. I mean, at 17, I graduated. I walked across that stage and got a diploma. The next day, I was on my way to Fort Lauderdale, and I was mixing for that band that weekend. That started, I was 17 years old.
So then you were that was your world then? You were touring with bands and everything for how long?
17, from about 17 to 21 full-time, better than 30-plus weeks a year that I was touring in the music industry. And in that time, from age 17 to 21, I went from doing nightclubs with 25 and 30 people to doing arenas with 50,000 people.
Can you name some of the bands that you got
Groups like
to do?
Molly Hatchet, groups like Black Oak, Arkansas, Rare Earth, Journey.
Hey, I know that one.
I know that.
Journey took out one of the
believing.
first. There was a Custom Audio Services was a company in Hollandale, Florida, that were MIT guys who had figured out how to take cheap audio equipment and make it sound like expensive audio equipment. They'd figured the components that made that happen. So bands that were touring with like Peavey was considered like a low end kind of equipment, and Crown was the top of the line. Well, they could take a Peavey amp and change the circuitry on the inside to make it sound like a Crown. If Peavey sponsored a band, you were seeing Peavey's name on it, but it really wasn't just stock Peavey equipment.
Yeah. So people who bought it would be like,
right.
it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah.
Apparently they needed someone like you or some of those MIT guys to work.
But they
that.
didn't. They knew how to do the technology, but they didn't know how to make the audio work as far as the sound quality was concerned. The other thing was they designed one of the first modular circuit boards where you could lift a channel out, or its EQ, or its compressor, or its preamp. You could pull that out and put a different one in of a different quality, or one that functioned in a different way. Whereas today, digitally, we just call it up. But these guys, you took the module out and actually plugged it into the board. So they had this board, and they wanted it to go out. They were friends of mine because I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and down in that area so much. So I went out with the board.
Yeah.
And that was where the Journey thing came in. I was there. I was out with them. Journey sound guy was doing a lot of the mixing, but I was there with the equipment.
Yeah.
The Beach Boys on numerous occasions, which sort of led to somewhat of a relationship with Brian Wilson. Brian, a true child of the 60s, and just an absolute genius at music. And really, we never really crossed over into religion, but he was a very deep individual, and I always enjoyed the conversations with him. Like Jerry Lee Lewis, I enjoyed that. A lot of groups that came along that would wind up being big bands, I knew them as nightclub acts.
Yeah.
Gloria Estefan. I remember Gloria Estefan was playing a stage that wasn't 20 by 20 in a nightclub the first time that I seen them. Twisted Sister was a top 40 group.
And now you get to be on our podcast while we have like 10 people in a 10 by 14 room, and we're going to be huge.
Hey,
it's going to be big.
It's where it starts. That's
so,
where it all goes.
So you have all of the background, you have all the knowledge, and you started out kind of by saying that you were actually kicked out from church because you played secular music.
Right.
So should we listen to secular music at all?
No, I mean secular music. There's nothing wrong with what you're listening to. It's its effect on you. If you're walking in Christ, there's things you're going to listen to once, and you're not going to listen to them again because they cross the line of what is acceptable for your heart to deal with. We had a group called Black Sabbath in the 70s and 80s, Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
And just straight up satanic albums that were, Blood Satan. I mean, they just had stuff that was, and the screams and the words spoken behind it. I mean, so if you were walking in Christ at that time, that was something you weren't gonna listen to, but listen to the soundtrack to Grease, or listen to stuff that the Bee Gees were doing for back in that time. If you're a milk Christian, if you've kind of not quite been any sanctification yet, you
like
just
a little
kinda,
adolescence in it,
right?
You know,
You've kind of started
still young
in there
as a Christian.
Sometimes, as Christians, we might have to be careful about what we let played in that environment, but people can think for themselves, and as your relationship develops and your walk with Christ develops, there's some of that stuff you're not going to agree with. You're not going to agree with the lyrics that are in it. And where do you stop secular music? I love jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And as a sound man, that they always hate that I say this, but the human voice is the ugliest instrument there is. It really
I hear that a
is.
lot from other people, but it's usually in response to me.
But if you listen to a good song and you listen to it being sung, and then you listen to it with a good saxophone player or a good cello player or a good violin player, it will reach far deeper into you than the lyrics ever did. So where does it stop being secular?
Yeah.
Is it only because of the lyrics? Is that where is that where you look at it? And again, you as a Christian, there are things that are just not going to sit well with you. You're not going to. The harmonies of the Eagles, the harmonies of Pogo in the 70s and 80s. I mean, and a lot of that stuff is just about life. Sometimes it crosses over into subjects that don't need to be discussed, and sometimes it's done in such a way that you don't know what's about it. Figure out Hotel California. I mean, I don't think Don Henley's figured it out yet. And he wrote it.
He wrote it. I'm not sure where Hotel California is.
Every time that you read something about that, there's a different interpretation of what that was about.
I love that when you deep dive into a song. It's like, what are they singing about?
Yeah.
Even one example I think was like the song Hallelujah, like that was played in Shrek. Shout out to Shrek.
Wow.
No, but like the song, like people are like, oh, it's a Christian song. It's like, no, it's a song about this, and it's like the owner's like, I just made it kind of, open to anyone's interpretation, and it's like that's pretty wild.
Right. If you listen to some Christian music, if you take it from the middle of the song, or if you don't let it go all the way through to the bridge of the chorus, it can sound very secular because it's very relationship based. It is a relationship that you're having with your Lord, and sometimes it can almost sound like a person to person relationship until it hits that chorus.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I remember like hearing some people talk about how like there's a lot of Christian music that makes a song sound like you can't tell if it's talking about, as you said, a relationship or if it's about God.
Right.
The same thing you sing about this person can apply to God, and it's like that's kind of wild. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And like I'm still trying to process that. Like what's going on there? Story
songs that are typically written about a person's life or where a person is in their life. You really have to be careful with what's said in them, because sometimes it kind of wanders outside of the boundaries of the relationship. But you read the book of Psalms, and there's times that you would think David might have wandered a little bit outside. Now he always comes back to God, but some of those things, again, if you take them in partial and you don't read the whole thing, you've got a different explanation. You got a different
how long,
way through
oh
it.
God, how long must I wait and not just doubt?
Right, and in doubt, it's okay to doubt God. Yeah. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Everyone goes through it, apparently.
Yeah, you got to go through that. I mean, it's part of who we are.
So are there any lines like not to cross in music?
If you listen to a song and if you're listening to a secular song and it's putting you in a state that makes you want to do sexually immoral things, out of relationship things, if you're listening to a song and it makes cocaine sound so good to you that you want to run out and buy a gram, those are songs you need to stay away from.
So if the song is instilling sinful desires, that's a no-go.
That's a no-go.
So, but that would be a personal thing for each individual, because some people can listen to, I don't know, Nicki Minaj and be like, no, I love Nicki Minaj as a Christian. And some people that would be instilling in them something that they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
So there's not exactly a don't listen to this person as a Christian or this song or anything like that.
Right. Because you don't. There are rock and roll bands out there. You two for one. I mean, they're Christian. They're all Christian. I mean, and a lot of their music, when you deep dive into their music, it's talking about the relationship with Christ and the world and God's control over the world as a universe. So there's not a hard and fast line that you don't listen to this person or this group, and you don't do it. You don't go to that place that, well, they're not a believer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the best drummers ever walked this planet was an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't believe that he stated being an atheist, but when you hear conversations with him, it really didn't apply, and that's Neil Peart with Rush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, Neil was just absolutely he was a phenomenal drummer, but his brain worked in that in just a different way. And when you get people that are that close to genius or are genius, they have a different way of looking at things. The world, he always stated atheist again, but when you listen to a lot of the way that he talked and things that he talked about, he believed in a higher power.
Yeah. So I know you're saying like probably shouldn't be listening to it. Is it more because like you feel like it's a sin, or do you feel more like it's a bad influence? Like
well,
it can affect you in a bad way.
What did Christ tell us? It's not the fact that you had performed, that you had an immoral act. The fact that you thought about it is just as guilty of the sin as actually doing it. So if you're listening to a song that's bringing you to those now, if you're married and it's bringing you to thoughts towards your wife, but you still have to be careful about how that gets geared, because then that becomes adultery. So you always have to be careful about what you're listening to and how it mentally affects you.
Yeah.
For me, it's a different thing, because I have to put 3 things on to enjoy music anyway. I can't listen to one thing at a time because I'm picking it apart. You know, producer should have did this, engineer should have did that.
You can't turn that off, huh? Like anytime you listen to music, it's just like they got that key wrong or that note or whatever.
I love jazz and I love listening to jazz, but I'll put it on in the living room with me, and I'll turn country on in the kitchen.
How does that help?
It throws my brain. I won't lock in on one of them.
Throw my brain for sure.
I won't lock in on one of them.
So there's no song or band that you just like, I can't not listen to that song. In fact, that one's perfect.
No, I've never heard. Eddie Olford was the engineer for Yes. If you know who Yes was, back in the 60s, and still they're still touring today. I mean, they were just here a few months back. All classical artists, every one of them. In 1 year in 1976 or 77, each one of them was classical musician of the year for their instrument and rock and roll musician of the year for their instrument in the same year.
That's impressive.
These guys were, except for the keyboard player, who was Rick Wakeman, and he was a alcoholic who was a genius and knew how to make keyboards do things nobody else knew how to do. But their music that was always about the universe and about the universe's effect on us and how we affect the universe, how we affect people in a group, how we affect individuals. It's kind of, now that they were more of a groove type band, so a song may go on for 45 minutes and only have 25 words in it.
Yeah,
because it was music. But
so you're more like in love with like the instrumental parts, like
oh yeah,
like you can just go on with that, but like lyrics and all that,
right?
You're like
lyrics. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to. In Christian music, I like to take the lyrics as they are, not in a melody or not in a rhythm kind of way, just the lyrics as they are. 'Cause there are a lot of good artists out there that the stuff comes straight out of the Bible, and just the way that they turn it, and it's just like a pastor would turn it to tell a story, and it's really good.
Yeah.
I enjoy it that way. But if it were my production to do, it would be a saxophone or some other instrument voicing it.
So then with Christian music, do you have you said that there's a lot of Christian music that is like solely just the Bible and it's only scripture that they sing and put music to. And then there's more, I don't know, made up stuff kind of loosely based on the Bible
Right.
or just kind of talking about God, but they kind of throw their own stuff in
Right.
there. Is there any cautions to what kind of Christian music you listen
yeah.
to, or how to pick
yeah.
and choose what's good and what's not?
Good
Right.
question.
It is, and you do have to do that. There's not a in our particular case at GCBC, there's not a song that hit that stage that the pastor has not said yea or nay to.
Mm-hmm.
So how does he do that though?
He takes the lyrics and he takes them against the theology, and if they don't line up, you don't do it. That's kind of where the church of today, the American church, is kind of suffering because they're wandering away from that. I mean, the next three generations after my generation, they're more interested in the truth. I mean, you guys are that in that group,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and you want things straight up. I mean, you want it how it is, and if it's hard to hear, it's hard to hear, but you want it that way. Whereas the people that are doing the advertising are trying to write lyrics to speak to you. They're trying to do it more in a general form, so that they're either one, not hurting your feelings, or number two, wanting you to really think about what it is. They want the overall concept of what it is to be what it is.
Right.
The American church today is God is good. And he's going to make your life better.
Yeah.
But by you being in church and by you being a part of the congregation, you're going to be a better person purely from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way it is. I mean,
you like more of that gritty stuff, that real.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to go through trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
You have to. I mean, how do you know how that's supposed to feel? The relationship, if you don't know what the bad side of it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you don't have, I have faith. How do you know you have faith? Have you been handed that diagnosis? Have you got that 2 a.m. phone call? Have those things happened in your life that have made you test that faith?
Yeah.
And it's going to happen to all of us. And that's the church can't paint this picture that believing in God makes your finances better, makes your marriage better, makes your God is in all those things it should be, but just because you're attending church and just because you're with this group of people, those things don't magically happen. There's a depth that you have to come to with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you always feel like you always have to play Christian music, or do you just like play some jazz, play some like
Jazz and country.
some country, jazz and country?
Jazz
Sorry.
and country together. I can really listen to anything because lyrically, I'm not really affected by what lyrics are saying to me in the musical form.
Yeah.
So even going back as far as to was talking about Black Sabbath and those things back in the 70s, they didn't make me want to chew the head off birds. They didn't make me want to.
Not yet.
Yeah, yeah. They didn't make me want to live in a bloodbath or do because I didn't pay attention to that. But I just didn't care. The music line, I didn't care for, and even at a time when I was walking outside of Christ, and there were years there. I mean, when you're touring, whether you're a musician or whether you're a technician, as I said before, you don't hear the word no. So every drug that's ever hit the table has either gone up my nose or coming up as a child in the early 80s, cocaine was called the rich man's aspirin. So, we
clears your head. It grew up
right
real quick. Huh?
It was kind of like in the 70s, all of them had the understanding and the thought process that if we all smoke marijuana, then we'll all see things the same way. So it kind of becomes a communal drug.
Yeah. So was that common, like, in that space? Like, I mean, we kind of hear about, like, the whole drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Like, was that, like, was that really as common as people say it is?
Oh, when I went to Fort Lauderdale, the first week, had got there on the weekend, Saturday night, one of the barmaids pops into my booth and what's known as a one hitter. It's a little device. It's got a hole in it. You hit the bottom of it, and it shoots compressed air, and it pushes cocaine right up in your nose. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, everybody carried them in their pocket. I mean, they're on the dance floor, and they grab this thing out, pop it, and go right on back to the world. Well, she pops up in the.
And you were 16 at the time. You're like,
I turned 17, but.
Oh, okay, yeah.
17, okay.
17. Sorry.
I was 17 years old. Yeah, but
your poor underdeveloped brain.
Oh yeah, yeah. But you don't. The rock and roll life at that point was purely that: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Nobody told you no.
So you could see why your parents would be concerned.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and my life started of a deterioration, and a whole nother level of evil entered in after 90. I actually went back out with a group out of Lexington, Kentucky, who had a chance of making it and did have a little bit of regional success. And then they kind of became the cruise ship kings, and did a lot of and I moved away from them by then because I don't care to live on the water all the time.
Yeah.
And but I went back out in 90 and did that, and wound up hooking up with a country band that all of them were Christian, and all of them were PKs. Every one of them's dad had been in the pulpit, and they were a country band.
PKs, pastor's kids.
Pastor's kids.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm like thinking, what is?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, pastor's kids are normally the worst of the kids.
Right, Jonathan? He's not here, but
Not even here.
No, I'm just messing.
You know, and I'm sure Jonathan has some stories along with.
Yeah.
You know, every other kid does. But when you're living in that lifestyle, it becomes the norm. You don't get a whole lot of sleep because sometimes you're doing 24 one-nighters in 28 days.
Wow.
So you're setting a show up, doing a show, breaking a show down, driving at least part of the way to the next one, or if not all the way there, trying to grab a couple hours sleep either on the front seat of the truck or in the bus, and be ready to go to do a setup, do a sound check, do a show, and just this process just repeats day after day. By the 10th day, you don't even know what town you're in. You have to write the city on an 8x10 piece of paper and lay it on the monitor all the way across the stage so that the band knows what town they're in. When they holler out, you know, how you doing Dayton, or how you doing Louisville, or how you doing Venice, Florida, because they holler out the wrong place.
Yeah. Knowing that part of like the culture and the band and all that, do you think like that's probably a big reason to stay away from secular music? Because like maybe that person's not singing about those things, but like that's the life they probably are partaking in. Well, I don't say for all, but like you kind of understand the general
I get
culture of it.
The general culture, but that culture may not be what's being brought forward in their music. I can tell you there are a lot of without knowing them as just knowing the industry in general, I can tell you that there are Christian artists that are out there touring today that are wrestling with alcohol, drugs, and having people thrown at them all day, every day.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a continual thing coming at you. And think about it, you're playing every single night. You're wore out. You're tired. This little bit of something that will help me get through the next day or whatever, you learn to justify it. Even in the name of Christ, you learn to justify it. So where do you draw the line to what you will listen to and what you won't listen to? It's in the 70s, 80s, the publicists did a very good job of hiding the musicians away. They come on stage, they did a show, you called them back for an encore, they did an encore, they went to the bus and they drove away. There was very rarely did you have backstage access as a radio promotion. That didn't happen that often. You weren't exposed to their life other than what would be written in a magazine, and sometimes what was written in the magazine was just something made up.
That would just shatter the whole illusion.
Right. You wanted the illusion because you cut an album, you toured an album, and then you would kind of go into a down period, and that would be like when you're writing and kind of spiraling, trying to get back to life after this tour. And then you go back in the studio, you do another album, and you go back out, and then the cycle starts all over again.
Yeah.
I'm always a little weird about it because the same people that are writing this copy that you're reading in a magazine, they're the same people that are advertising the cereal that you eat or the toilet paper that you use. It's the same people. They're writing it for a certain audience to get a certain response.
Yeah. So just kind of getting close to wrapping things up in here. Any kind of like closing statements or remarks, or I don't know, like is there a warning, or maybe if there's another young Christian just kind of curious, hey, like I don't know if I should be listening to Drake, or I don't know if I should be listening to Journey.
Right.
I mean, any kind of word of advice or thought to that person?
Again, it goes back to where we were before. If you're listening to a piece of music, the lyrics of that song, sometimes music. I wear the T-shirt around all the time that says, "When all else fails, music speaks." Music sometimes can create thoughts, and depending on where you are in your life, that you really shouldn't be having. Of not listening to or listening to secular music, I don't think you draw the line there. I think you have to draw it at what affects you.
Yeah.
Where it sends your mind, because again, the thought is as sinful as the act.
Yeah. Now I'm just kind of curious because like I used to struggle with depression and suicide, and like I have a whole album of like just depressing songs, and I'm just kind of curious, did that make me even more depressed, or was I just listening to that because that's the only thing I liked, being depressed?
You like being depressed? Well, not
like, but I'm just kind of curious because like that was part of my past. Like I have a whole like list of albums. Like man, it just got dark. Thing I can like see my history of the songs I liked and when I liked it. I'm like, there was a.
What do you think that music was doing for you?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Is like, was it comforting, or was it pushing me further down?
It was justifying your condition.
Ooh.
Think about that music, because the human brain, you can justify anything. I could justify doing 4 grams of cocaine a day. I could justify smoking a half ounce of weed a day. I could justify chasing that up with 3 or 4 hits of speed, because that's what's going to get me to tomorrow.
Yeah.
And none of that's right. And the fact that there's, when you talk about sex in rock and roll, there's a girl in every port, and probably not one, probably 3 or 4. But I don't have a relationship back home, and the only relationship that I'm going to get or be able to have that even gets close to a relationship is the girl that I'll see in Cincinnati tonight, or the girl I'll see in Cleveland tomorrow night, because I seen them a year ago. So you're always justifying your condition, where you're at. Now, walking in Christ, justifying, you don't have to justify that condition. It's justified for you. If you listen to your life, and what you listen to in music will change. So I would think a lot of people, as your walk changes in your relationship with Christ, you will steer more towards Christian music or Christian-based music, because that's the way you feel.
All right, I'm gonna give this a shot this week. No more secular music, just a week. Just gonna see how it goes. I'm down to try, but honestly, this has been pretty cool. Just talking with you again, guys. Like, just Larry's been super helpful getting all this stuff set up. Thank you for taking the time just to come on here and kind of share about that. Josh, you've been quiet the last few minutes. Anything you want to say real quick? No?
Thanks, Larry. I'm falling asleep.
Sorry. Yeah, I know. We started a little bit later today, so we're going to wrap things up.
And I'm the old guy.
Yeah, right.
They called me grandpa all through middle school and high school. I put myself to bed at 9 o'clock. I'd be in the middle of a movie. Be like, all right, fam, going to bed. Like, you don't want to finish the movie? Like, no, I'm tired.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Still going to be continuing our series with canned Christians, and you guys have a good day, and stick around for our next episode.